Welcome, friends, to another episode of A Podcast with Interesting People. I'm Adrian Sinclair, and today my guest is Karen Threlkel. She's a doctor of naturopathic medicine, and we are going to be talking about naturopathic medicine, genetics and nutrition, women's health, and various therapies that she will tell us all about and educate us. Welcome, Karen.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
So let's dive in. What is naturopathic medicine? How does it differ from like your classic, pill popping medicine? Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, naturopathic medicine's really been around for a very long time. The roots are in botanical medicine, natural medicine, anything you would classify as a natural medicine that had not been encapsulated yet. So going back to the times where we used herbs and botanicals, hydrotherapy, which is the alternation of hot and cold, all these different things that we've been using for hundreds of years were systemized about 100, 200 years ago. And it's at a point where we've been able to call it an actual system. So it became very popular in the late 19th century. And it was actually MDs who were doing this more so, taking these old traditional medicines and formulating it, applying them to more conventional disease states, the things that have been developing over a number of decades. And then over time, it became less popular after the Civil War, after antibiotics and penicillin were created, because these were amazing drugs. They could fix things so fast, so easily. It was a miracle. But then, as we know with the story, over the next century after that, unfortunately got abused. And so there was a resurgence of an interest in naturopathic medicine, probably around the 60s, 70s, coming into the hippie era, where people wanted to get away from that. They weren't getting the healing and health from that like they had prior. And so that's where we are at now. It's just actually getting more and more popular. More physicians have actually been translating their practice into not only what they do, but taking functional courses, integrative courses to expand their repertoire so that they can really get in on all this good stuff, having the basis of traditional medicine, but also having our botanical medicines. And so we kind of have the advantage to being able to already have that in our tool set, if you will, because that's what we were trained in. So in naturopathic medicine nowadays, and I'm speaking of this century, where it was really formulated into a 4-year medical school. So you go to a regular bachelor's and get a degree, and usually pre-med type of things, but it doesn't have to be exactly that, biology. And then you go to a certified naturopathic medical school. So it is a postgraduate 4-year school where it's in-house. You're going to medical school like any other MD would. The difference really comes down to philosophy and the way that we treat people. We're looking holistically. That's just a part of our training, which is really a big benefit for us. We're not looking at a person, at a disease. We're looking at, okay, you have this problem, but where's it coming from? Is it as simple as, I'm not sure anything's simple anymore, but we'll just say as simple as a cold? Do we just need to use some herbs or something to get you over this hump, and then you go about your day, hopefully, in an easier way, and hopefully it'll resolve in about a week? Nowadays, unfortunately, things are getting more complicated, because why is somebody getting a cold now? It's not just once a year anymore. Sometimes it's every few months, or a really sick person every month. What's going on here? So you have to dig deeper. And that's what we're really trained to look for. What are these patterns? Where is it coming from? Is it something that they're eating? Is it in their lifestyle? Is it in their stress levels? Is it where they live? Is it something environmental that they're being affected by, in their pollution, in their water, the groundwater even? So with naturopathic medicine, we have that advantage that we learn how to look for these things. We use conventional laboratories just like the regular medical doctors do, but we also have functional labs that we're trained in. And that is really where it comes down to finding out why somebody is sick. We can do something that would see in real life, how is your body actually responding to stress? What's going on with your digestive system in terms of the actual environment, not just if you're having any bleeding or is there any a polyp or something like that, but what's the balance of good versus bad bacteria, and understand what is the body set up for, how are you functioning now, and what's getting in your way from getting better. That's really the main idea. And of course, when you see a doctor, they're always trying to figure out why are you sick. But unfortunately, in this medical system, based on insurance, you go to see a doctor, you often don't have enough time to dig in and say, well, I'm getting a cold because I'm working 80 hours a week. And by the way, I'm also a mother of 4 and I'm married. I'm taking care of everybody in the family. Oh, and by the way, I have an elderly parent that I'm dealing with. All that adds up, and it really does boil down to what's going on with your life. And that's a lot easier said than done in terms of changing things. Life is what it is, but we have a lot of tools where we can go in and say, well, we're going to do a lab that actually tracks you over the course of a day, figure out how your body deals with stress. And there are actual vitamins, minerals, botanical medicine, herbs that can help your body deal with it. So even if you can't change your life circumstances, we can help you get over the hump, hopefully. Granted, if you're working 1,000 hours a week and you're just burning yourself and there's no way around that, no pill in the world is going to help. But if it's something more reasonable in real life, we can find some ways to help you. And our job is also to try to encourage somebody to look at their life. Is all of this necessary? Can you get some other help in? You don't have to do it all by yourself, I hope. So we actually have all those conversations, and we get to take about an hour to an hour and a half to talk to somebody. With the insurance, unfortunately, the doctors have to set it up that you see them about every 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the doctor, and you just can't get a lot out. And I know the doctors are frustrated by this too, but it's kind of the way the insurance has pushed things. So it's hard for them to be effective as well. So, I feel bad that they can't move in this direction. Some have, they're not taking insurance anymore. So I'm sure a lot of people are finding that, and the concierge services are coming about. So there's definitely a need for more naturopathic approaches. They're not necessarily calling it that, but that's really what it is. We're just trying to look at holistically, truly what's going on with the mind, body, and soul sometimes. I mean, if there's truly a problem going on that maybe I can't address, I'm not a trained social worker or a psychologist or a spiritual leader. If it's actually more in that level, I can help you on the biochemical level and help your body deal with whatever's going on. But if this is rooted in something much deeper or psychological level, then I would suggest, speaking with a counselor, or, if their church is very important to them, talking with their priest or minister, actually encouraging them to go in that direction and treat the whole person, really dig into what the actual problem is. So those are really the biggest differences. It's the philosophy. We're trained in the same basic sciences. We get all the same classes. We're even trained in prescription medicines. We just try not to use them. It's not unusual for a naturopathic doctor to use an antibiotic every now and then. Sometimes that's the best call, and that's how we're trained. We are not so hardcore where we're going to say it's our way or the highway, or we don't believe in anything else. We were really taught to work together. My school's the National College for Naturopathic Medicine, and just up the hill about a half mile was the medical school. And it was really neat. They were starting to get behind this idea too, where the students, we would actually get together and have little parties and try to get to know each other. So the integration of these two systems have been happening for a while, and I think it's getting better and better. There are more and more places that are bringing together naturopathic doctors, medical doctors, psychologists. That's what we have at our place. We have about 7 or 8 different practitioners, and it's a really wonderful place to work, to be, because somebody can come to us and you have a wide variety of therapies that could help. Certainly we'll pinpoint what's going to work for you, but that's the beauty of it. We're trying to treat the entire person in the most natural way possible. First and foremost, looking at what the cause is, unraveling that cause, giving the body the ingredients it needs to make itself better on its own. And then after time, you don't need those ingredients because hopefully you change the problem, which is getting enough sleep, reducing stress, eating well, taking time for yourself. That's really the basis of being healthy. All these other things, vitamins, minerals, herbs, all that stuff, really should be thought of as a medicine. It's something you use temporarily to get you over the hump and can then get back to a good, normal diet and lifestyle. That's truly what naturopathic medicine is all about.
I'm going to quote you over here, something that really spoke to me that I found on your website. You said, "I believe in the body's inherent ability to establish, maintain, and restore health. My role is to facilitate and augment this process, to identify and remove obstacles to health and recovery, and to support the creation of a healthy internal and external environment." I mean, that just makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think? Why do you think these two worlds of like the classical medical field and the naturopathic medicine? Why do you think they are fusing again? Because it seems like, and I've been talking to several doctors, and I've had several on the show. It seems that there's a certain level of frustration where they want to reach out and do a little bit more than what their medical school is teaching them. Why do you think? Why do you think in this day and age, this expansion and fusion of what you do and what the classical sort of medicine does? Why is that happening?
Health has gotten much more complicated. Even in my field, doctors who graduated in the 60s and 70s, if they're still in practice now, they've commented it's just gotten more complicated because our food supply is not near as good as it used to be because of all the pesticides, poor farming techniques where the minerals are extracted or are actually not even put back into the soil, so our foods actually are not as nutritious as they used to be. Our water supply may be clean in terms of not having parasites or bacteria that can harm us, but it's full of chlorine and all kinds of things that aren't necessarily taken out. So we have a limited access to actually be healthy. And illnesses are not presenting the way they used to. They used to be almost clear cut, maybe about, I'm going to say about 100 years ago. People would get sick and you could fall into a specific diagnosis, and it was relatively easy to say, okay, well, this is the problem. If it was something quite severe, they might not have had a good treatment for it yet, but it's much more clear. These days, people are presenting with some classic signs of a particular illness, but so many miscellaneous things that don't seem to fit into a category. And the benefit of a diagnosis, and nobody likes to be labeled, I'm not saying we should label, but if we have a diagnosis to start with, sometimes it's a good way to point us in a direction if it's an accurate diagnosis. But these days, the jumping off point is, okay, for instance, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. Why? Honestly, we still don't know why, but at least we had a medication that treated it well. But as time goes on, a lot of people started reacting to these medications. And I think it's because our bodies are not detoxifying as well. They're not breaking down these medications as well. Our bodies are overburdened to get rid of these extraneous things that we did not have in our system several decades ago. Other medications have been presented in the natural world, so they're more from, for instance, with the hypothyroidism, they're glandulars that we use, concentrated thyroid medication from actual thyroid from an animal, and a lot of people do really well with that because it's more of a combination of what your thyroid actually uses in real life to make the thyroid hormones, all the minerals that are required, and a lot of people feel better doing that. So I going back to your original question, why is this happening? I think people are just getting frustrated that it's just gotten complicated. I mean, complicated is really the best way to put it. It would be great if we could go in to see the doctor, have a problem, the doctor can figure out what it is, and great. But with all the pesticides in our environment, heavy metals, solvents, even EMF, I'm not an expert on that, but there have been a lot of things going on in the world, a lot of conferences saying EMF is not great for us. Of course, we're surrounded by it. We're surrounded by plastics. We didn't have these things 100, 200 years ago. I mean, certainly we were dying of infectious disease, which we have a much better grasp on, but technology industry has taken off so much in the past 150 years. Our bodies are not equipped to deal with that. So, our bodies evolved over a million years or so. I have no idea, but over a long period of time, and our bodies just do not change fast enough to deal with the chemicals in our environment. So people, patients are finding out on their own different things that work for them, and they're
Mm-hmm.
presenting it to their doctor, and the doctor doesn't necessarily know what that thing is or what that idea is. So it's great that people are getting together and having more conversations about what's actually helping people. So I really see us as growing together and hopefully become one universal medicine in a way. I mean, it's hard to be an expert in everything, but if we can all work together and present what we know to help that individual, I think that's the right way to go. So I think it's great that so many different practitioners are studying natural medicines and seeing different ways of using it in their practice, because we're simply complicated now. If we could, my dream is always, if somebody comes to me with a very complicated problem, I want to tell them, let me just put you in ashram and you just meditate all day and rest, and I'll give you good food and good water, and you just rest for like a year. You'll be
Mm-hmm.
fine. most likely you'll be fine, but not many people can do that. So you're working against the tide always when it comes to health, because I've had some people come to me and we need to work on stress and we know what's going on with their biochemistry and we give them the right herbs and nutrients to help with that. And they come back in the month and they say, okay, well, I feel pretty good, so I'm going to stop taking my supplement. I'm like, okay, but we'll see what happens, because have your stress levels changed? Have you been sleeping better? Have you reduced your hours at work to a more reasonable amount? Well, no, I haven't done that yet because I feel so good I can do it. And that's kind of the edge of the sword that you have to walk. Are you helping somebody feel so good that they might push themselves a little harder than they should have anyway?
Mm,
And so it's always about education, trying to help somebody understand how their body works, what's going to be good for it, what can they do with their bodies in an appropriate way. So a big part of my education, actually, it was really pounded into our heads. You were as much a doctor as a teacher, to try to help people understand what's going on with their body so they can really get it and say, okay, I can't run on fumes. I will have problems 10, 20 years ago, down the road. And that's also what we're looking at. Prevention is the name of the game, which is hard to tell a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old, because they're not going to have problems for probably another 10 or 20 years, and it's going to happen overnight. It's almost better when we get the younger person who's a little bit sick, and it's frustrating for them, of course, because why are they sick? They're only 25 years old, but they can learn what their body needs to do. I mean, I'm in Washington, D.C., and we have a number of people who work on the Hill, a lot of staffers, and they're all stressed out, and they're all 20-something years old, and they don't understand why they're so sick. Like, you got a lot going on. You have to deal with your stress levels, and we can help you with that, but I just got to put it out there. I'm not going to keep you in the dark that this is actually where it's coming from. This is a problem, and then you have to decide what to do with it. I never tell somebody to quit their job. I have had a few people do that anyway, just because they know their health is at risk.
mm.
And that's kind of the name of the game, just looking at these stress levels, which cause ultimately inflammation, which is the root of all evil. That's another bottom line, if you want to look at it that way.
So I'm glad to hear you say that. It seems like more and more people are in your profession, and medical doctors are looking at our bodies as a complex system. And actually, I had that conversation recently with another doctor who was again trained in one field, but it seemed like his field was expanding because people realized that there's more and more to it. It's not just like it's just not one specialization. It's a everything is connected. Our bodies are systems, and so you need to treat them that way. And it's not only what you put in your body, but also like you said, stress, external things, chemical things, emotional things. So it's a system, and so it's good to hear that it seems like doctors are expanding their thinking about it, not only in terms of like, oh, you have a headache, take this pill and it's going to be fixed. Instead, they're looking at, well, what is it cause? What's the source? What's the cause of that? And then looking a little bit deeper into it. Your practice, the office that you guys work, you have seems like a staff with various specialties. How do you guys come together when you have a patient? Take me through when there's a new patient coming in. If I would come into your office and you said, typical consultation is about an hour, which is a refreshing thought because, like as you mentioned, typically with medical doctors, it's 15-minute slots, and that's all you get, right? It's really quick typically. Right. So I'm going to ask actually on a question on that as well. But what does a session look like when someone visits you initially?
Well, before they even walk in the door, I send them a very long intake because I want to know absolutely everything they're willing to share. I have not counted, but it's probably a solid 15 to 20 pages. So we break it
Wow.
down into, what's your most pressing concern, but we want to also get into nutritional history, environmental history, any diagnosis, past or present, and then actual symptoms lists. And I do it this way because it just jogs somebody's memory. It's easy to remember the one big thing you're here for, but what happened to you 20 years ago, and actually getting that chronology. So if somebody comes in and they're super complicated, we'll ask them to create a chronology to the best of their ability and go year by year or decade by decade, whatever's easier for them, because that helps us go back in time and see, well, where did all this start? That's what you always want to do. You might have had hypothyroidism for 10 years, but it started 10 years ago. Well, what happened before that? Oh, well, my grandmother died and we were super close. And well, that was a big stressor, and stress is going to affect your thyroid. So it's little things like that that's actually very important for helping us figure out what's going on. So before you even walk in the door, we're going to have you fill out a nice long intake form just to try to get everything on the page. And then you come in and you see me for about an hour and a half, and we talk about all that, starting with your most pressing concerns, and then whatever systems are part of that problem. And we'll look through everything and try to bring in other pieces. If it looks like environment is actually part of the problem, I will then send them away with an environmental questionnaire to see if we need to dig into that a little bit more. But on the first day, we're just trying to get these ideas. And that's really what it is. The first day is all about a lot of different ideas, hashing it out about, how did this start? Why did this start? Does anybody else in your family have this? And then decide, well, what are the labs that are going to help you? Most of the time, doing a lab is a very useful thing because trying to treat empirically can be useful, and it's certainly possible, especially if the lab just isn't doable at that moment in time. But most of the time, they're going to walk away with either a lab form for a blood draw, or they're going to walk away with a functional lab, which is a nice little kit that's self-contained that they can do it in their own time, because that's what the functional labs are doing, is seeing what is going on in real life. What does your body look like in a real day in the life of you? And it might be urine or saliva or stool. And then they send it off on their own. And then so that's usually the first day. If there's something pretty clear that we feel like we just want to do a little experiment between now and next time, and it's a simple little herb or a supplement, I might suggest taking something at that time. But it's really a couple weeks later, when they come back to review that lab, is when we're going to figure out a good treatment plan. On the first day as well, though, if it feels like there is a little bit more that we could be doing than just looking at what I can do, I'll make some referral recommendations, if maybe to see a psychotherapist or a social worker. We have people here, of course, but if they prefer to use somebody on their insurance, that's fine. Or if they need medical acupuncture, my colleague, Dr. Safian, does that. We also have physical therapy or massage. So it depends on what they're presenting. And we have access to all these individual practitioners here, but it's up to them if they want to pursue that. And the first visit can admittedly be a little overwhelming because there's just so much information I want to impart to somebody, and I write everything down. I make sure they get a copy of the plan so that they don't just totally glaze all over, because we start talking and then I see them get out a notebook and they start writing it down. Like, you're going to be okay. I'm writing everything down for you. Don't you worry. And it's usually pretty clear by the time they leave. I'll go into, well, this is what I think the problem is. This is where I think it's coming from. Let's do a lab to confirm that, so we can really be specific about the treatment that we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Because if somebody comes in, they feel pretty secure that, well, I know I'm super stressed. I know that's a problem. Okay, but your cortisol levels actually change depending on what stage of stress maladaptation you're in. So if I gave you something to reduce your stress levels, meaning reducing your cortisol, and your cortisol is actually low because you already went from high to low, and I try to make that lower without realizing it, you'll actually feel worse. So we're going to hold back on treatment like that until we get a laboratory. Mm-hmm. But another occasion would be if I have a peri or even a postmenopausal woman come in discussing some issues, and we feel it's really related to what's going on with her hormones. We might try a simple little herb like Vitex that doesn't really push you too much one way or another. It's just a little tweaking to see if, okay, you're at the beginning of this process. Maybe we can just tweak it with a little herb. We'll do some other labs in the interim and see how you are. But that's usually how it goes. Talk about your case, pressing concerns, see what connects in, see if we need to dig in deeper into that specific problem or bring other systems in as well, whether we have to look at the digestion or food allergies, what have you. If it's a musculoskeletal problem, maybe we need to also include some acupuncture or body work, so you can get started on that at the same time and just try to move you closer to your health as soon as possible. We don't have to wait weeks on end just for a lab to come back.
So there were a couple of terms that you mentioned, and I'm kind of like holding them in my memory, so I'm going to toss them out right now so you can talk a little bit more about that. So one of them is you mentioned influence of EMF, and as I understand it, EMF is electromagnetic field, if that's the acronym that we're talking about.
Right,
and then you also mentioned functional medicine, and I've heard that term being used around, and I'm not sure what exactly it means. So if you can talk about that, I'd love to learn a little bit more about it.
Sure. Well, functional medicine is a very general term that's been thrown around, as you said, for about 20, 30 years now. And I don't know who started. It might have been Jeff Bland. But I had a really hard time actually understanding what functional medicine was for the longest time because it was presented to us when I was in school. Actually, we had a grand rounds on it, and for the entire hour, I was sitting there trying to figure out what they were trying to tell me because they were talking about naturopathic medicine. They were trying to say, well, you figure out what's wrong with somebody by doing these labs that show you what's going on in real life, and then you treat them with herbs, and then you can retest to make sure you're going in the right direction. So that's ultimately what the term means. Uh, the non-functional labs or I don't want to say non-functional medicine, that's not right, but it's the way you use the medicine, how the body is actually functioning in real life. So for instance, blood work is considered a static test. You're just drawing blood over the course of a few seconds and you're getting a snapshot in time of what's happening at that moment in time. Whereas the functional lab is several collections, usually over the course of a day or two, depending on what you're doing. And that shows you your body in action, functioning in real life, not just sitting there holding out your arm, getting a blood draw. So it shows your body in movement in real life.
Mm-hmm.
And the functional labs, as we're calling them, are the things that generally it's not blood work because you would have to go back and forth to a phlebotomy station several times in one day. So it's going to be the urine, saliva, or the stool. Let me give you some examples of what those labs are to make it a little bit easier. So the first one, stress, like we were talking about, you can use urine or saliva, and you usually do 4 different tests over the course of a day, and then it actually tracks your cortisol levels, and we have a normal tracking that we're supposed to have, a normal pattern. And if you don't match that, then there's some imbalance, and then we try to fix that with herbs and nutrients. Another functional lab is a digestive analysis, generally using stool. So if you go to a gastroenterologist, they can be really great at checking things out to make sure you don't have cancer or what have you, but they're going to do a colonoscopy, endoscopy, which are very invasive and sometimes appropriate. But if you come back and it's all negative, but yet you still have this problem, the stool test can show us, well, what's going on with your good bacteria. It can actually look at the environment, not just if you have pathology. So maybe that's another way of thinking about it. Functional labs in general are not looking at pathology. We're looking at function, what's in there, what's in the environment, what's influencing the body. And so that the GI test is going to look at the good bacteria, bad bacteria. It can look for parasites and candida, but digestive function, inflammation, all these really important things that can have consequences down the road. So it shows you things you can fix right now if you have an imbalance of bacteria or candida, or if you just have some irritation from maybe eating gluten, or you find inflammation from a protein called calprotectin that's detecting the inflammation, then you can say, well, this is a problem now, and it's going to become more and more of a problem. I should really fix this right now. So I'm not sure if that's exactly how the term functional came to be based on laboratory. I think it's just the idea of people want to find another way of working with the body that is in tune with the body, and we're not just trying to take over what the body is supposed to be doing by using a drug. We want to work with the body, and that's how I look at it. I think of adding the ingredients to the body to refill whatever has been depleted, because your body's working really hard all the time to maintain its homeostasis. But if you've been in high stress, then you're using up your B vitamins, your vitamin A, your vitamin C, and so you have to eat more of those foods. You have to do something so it doesn't become as depleted, which is getting more sleep. But you, on top of that, can take the individual vitamins, and that just helps get you there faster. So adding these ingredients so your own body can get there faster on its own. So that's how I think of functional medicine.
Most of your patients, do they come in?
Excuse me.
Most of your patients, do they come in after they go through like the classic approach of like going to, wow, that was a big mug?
Absolutely. Drink your water every day.
I'm with you. About a gallon of water every single day.
Yep. Absolutely. Yes, up.
What I was curious about is patients that visit you, do you find that they typically exhaust like the standard medicine approach and then they come and visit you, or are they already so aware of what naturopathic doctors can offer that they go straight to you and just kind of sidestep even like the classic approach?
Both, but probably more common that they've exhausted their resources and they're looking to me as a last resort. That
Mm-hmm.
can be very true. And I think it's going to differ from place to place. Washington, D.C. is very quick paced, and I think most people like to get in and get out. So they might not have taken the time to understand that there's another way.
Mm-hmm.
But the added difficulty to that is when people sometimes seek me out, they're going to try to substitute a pill for a pill instead of looking at the actual true naturopathic system of identifying the cause. So in our practice, it might be a little bit different anyway because I work with a medical doctor, separate practices, but we work together, which is really a beautiful relationship when we can work together, because a lot of people will find him first just because he does take insurance. So, that's kind of an easy in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they might have found him anyway with further research and saw that he was more holistically minded. So they'll find him first, but the way we work is he will see them and then say, well, are you interested in a medicine or do you really want a more natural approach? So he'll kind of offer it to him like that. And then if they want to go in the natural way, they'll come and see me. But I still need to educate them on what this is all about. Naturopathic medicine hopefully is not substituting a pill for a pill, but you have to meet everybody where they're at, though. Sometimes that's just what's going to work. So I would never tell somebody it's my way or the highway. You have to tell me what your real life circumstances are. I might have a beautiful plan, but if it doesn't match what you can do, that's not going to help you. So
Mm-hmm.
we will adjust and kind of negotiate together. It's the funniest thing
Right.
when people come in and they want to get better and I tell them my plan. They're like, yeah, no. And then I'll have to say, well, how many pills are you willing to take? Okay, well, what's the most important? So there's a lot of negotiating that happens, but that's okay. Everybody is where they are, and we need to work with that. So so it can really be both ways. People can do the research and they just like the idea of a natural approach. And it's very refreshing, I have to say, to find somebody who is a true naturopathic patient. They want to come in a sense, not take a pill. They want to
Mm-hmm.
figure out why they're sick and then eliminate that cause and get better. That's how we were taught, and that's what we wanted to do. And then you graduate and get into the real world and you realize people are complicated and it's
Mm-hmm.
not quite that straightforward and it's not going to go according to the book. So I almost have to take a step back and remember, oh, this is fun. Okay, good. We get to look at why you're sick and you're willing to make the changes and now you're actually going to get well. That's fantastic. But that doesn't happen every time. So most of the time people are coming from my colleague who are at first looking for just a natural pill instead of their high blood pressure pill. And then hopefully as they're feeling better there and getting comfortable with a natural approach, they might allow me to say, hey, have you thought about maybe acupuncture for your high blood pressure? Or maybe we should look at those stress levels, or what's going on with your digestion? You have irritable bowel syndrome? Let's look at your stress levels. So it's kind of a fun way to negotiate, and it's a fun relationship, and that's how we really look at working with people here. They're patients, but I call them people more so because we're all just people working together. I don't really see this division of doctor patient. So I just sit down with somebody and it's just like talking to a friend, and we try to figure out what the problem is and try to fix it the best way that we can.
It's an interesting and refreshing approach, especially considering that the standard approach to the medicine is science based. It's like these are the inputs, this is the control, here are the results, and every single time we're shooting for the same set of results. However, like we are so even though we're the same species, there's only one human race, and there's such a huge biodiversity. Everybody has different genes, and so it's almost silly to kind of expect that same results would happen to like everyone, and it's just like very simplified in my opinion. And I'm not a doctor, and don't take my advice on it, but I am a doctor to myself by myself. I'd like to experiment on myself by trying different things, whether it's an approach to a different diet or just trying to change your lifestyle. You are your best, how you feel. Test. Doctor can take your draw your blood and take all these different tests and tell you certain things from the sort of like the outside, somewhat objective to for the test perspective, but it won't tell you how you feel. You are your best doctor in that sense. You know your own
Yeah,
feelings.
you know yourself best.
Mm-hmm.
I always choose to believe my patient. I will get the kind of person who comes in and say, I've tried this herb, I've tried this nutrient, I know it's supposed to do this, but it didn't do this, it did the complete opposite, and that happens. So
Hmm.
even in our world, people can have negative effects from even something very benign. And it's not always easy to understand, but the fact is they responded that way. Do we know why? No, but guess what? There's about 10 other things that we can try, and it's really fun that we don't ever really run out of ideas. We might have a certain algorithm in our head just because that's how you're taught, and it's a good jumping off point, but that's what it is. You jump
Hmm.
off because if that does not suit the person, or you've taken all these different things into consideration and you have to pull that one thing or another thing in, it just develops on its own. So it's sort of like plucking that guitar string, and you're going to hear that one sound, but if you could see all the vibration, it's not like a static thing. It's bringing in everything and making this beautiful resonance. And that's what we're trying to go for.
What I think is really what I'm happy about is seeing more and more openness and people exploring these things, because the standard approach is, science, science, science. The complexity is like not really taken that much into account, and you can't really do science with too many multivariate elements in the equation, because there's just too many possibilities. So I think people are willing to explore and try different things. And when you take an herb or you take some kind of natural remedy, it's a complex set of molecules. It's not just one molecule, right? So there's more things that are
Right.
in that space, and they affect you have a catalyst that affects this and that, and so it's way more complex than people typically think. Like the simplistic approach, like I got a headache, okay, you take Tylenol and you're done with it. But like, how many other
Mm-hmm.
side effects you get from that? So it is
Mm-hmm.
refreshing to see that there is kind of like this, I guess, growing awareness that we're so complex that maybe science can't cope with all of that, because that was typically our solution to everything, just science, science, science. And if you were, using herbs or something, you were some kind of quack, or like, oh, this is some kind of pseudoscience, and, don't believe in that. Because in a way, it is very difficult to kind of quantify everything and make it fit it into this scientific process and scientific
Mm-hmm.
method of verifying. Um, so given that, herbs are so complex and these natural remedies are complex, how do you tweak that? Is it just like, hey, try a little bit because it worked for most people, and then let's see how you react with it, and then we go from there? Is that the approach?
In general, there is a place to start. There's a general protocol, and there's been enough research that we do have an idea of a milligram quantity for different herbs or nutrients. So there are lots of protocols set up that we'll start with, but that's the fun of it. You start somewhere and then somebody reacts a certain way, and then it's almost free form where you're really just trying to figure out, well, what are you going to respond to? And depending on the substance, you can't do that with absolutely everything. Sometimes you do need to know what you're doing about something. But in general, if I put somebody on an herb, I'll have a range in mind. I usually start off on the low end, like one pill of something. And then if we got a bit of the desired result, okay, is it logical to try another one? Okay, maybe we could try two, but we might want to add something else in there to balance it out. So we're keeping everything in balance. And that's one of the great things about herbs. They're powerful, but they are more food-like. So they're not just pushing one pathway. So you're going to affect a lot of different systems. The vitamins and the minerals are a little bit more drug-like, if you want to think of it that way, because it's one thing, unless you're using a complex of something.
Mm-hmm.
And that can work great for some things or specific problems. A good difference is looking at between L-tryptophan and 5-HTP. A lot of people will use those nutrients for depression. It pushes the serotonin pathway. The L-tryptophan is an amino acid, so it's a derivative of food. Basically, from protein, and then it in itself gets broken down into 5-HTP, and then it makes serotonin. But that's not the only thing it's going to do. Your body sees it as this protein, and it's going to do a few different things with it. Whereas when you take just the 5-HTP, you skip the tryptophan, and you really push more of that serotonin pathway. It's not going to do so many other things. So you can use nutrients very drug-like, and I think that's sometimes where we make a mistake. We forget about the natural approach or the naturopathic philosophy. We always have to have that emblazoned on our brain. It can be exciting to get a desired effect, but if you're basically just using 5-HTP instead of Prozac, okay, good. It's probably going to have fewer side effects, but are you still treating the problem or not? You're
Mm.
still depressed for a reason. So so you have to keep those ideas in mind.
So, what is the naturopathic philosophy? What did the school left you with in terms of that like banner? What the naturopathic philosophy is?
Basically, nature cure, breaking it down to understanding a human being and why they're sick.
Hmm.
I mean, that's kind of a big thing, but then saying, well, what's the cause? Can it be eliminated? If it can, okay, stop doing that behavior, stop eating that thing, and then your body will get better on its own. If not, then that's where you start to tweak it, and that's where it gets to be more complicated. So when I left school, I wanted to follow the true naturopathic philosophy of eliminate the cause, the body will heal itself. Ultimately, the body will heal itself if given the opportunity. And then I get into Washington, D.C., and it's a madhouse, and people are super stressed and doing lots of stuff all the time. And the biggest complaint I'm going to see is low energy, high stress, high anxiety. And so you have to adapt to your environment. And that's where you start treating allopathically. So that's what we call regular medicine, allopathic rather than naturopathic. And you have to find that happy balance within your practice and meeting the person where they're at again. But ultimately we're trying to just use nature cure and let the body help itself if you can get the problems out of the way and let them do that.
So, do
That's
you
the driving
believe?
force.
So do you believe that given the right environment and circumstances, the body can spontaneously heal?
For the most part, it depends on the problem. I mean, if you have a broken bone and it has to be set, you have to get somebody
Right.
to set your bone.
Right.
So it kind of depends on the problem. But in general, if it's the regular run of the mill thing,
Hmm.
if you can give your body the right circumstances, the right environment, then you can heal from a lot. It's complicated now because we have a much more complicated environment. For instance, Lyme disease is just so prevalent. There are some people who can overcome it with a course of antibiotics in a month. There are other people who suffer for years on end and sometimes never get better. Now we've been looking into genetics on that front as well as many fronts in the medical world. We don't graduate knowing this information. This has really been coming up over the past 10 years or so,
Hmm.
talking about methylation and the MTHFR gene. A lot of people are familiar with that term because that was one of the big things that we found out about 20 years ago. And we realized we need to be using active folate, and that goes down a whole
Hmm.
different road that we can talk about if you like. But uh,
I
basically, the
do.
genetics are making, okay.
I had two
Genetics are making
questions for
things
you.
complicated.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on genetics. One of the things that you do in your practice over there is genetic nutritional consultation, and I wanted to understand that better. My understanding is, you look at the profile of the DNA of someone, and then you try to match certain things to that. Can you tell me a little bit more? What is genetic nutritional
Hmm.
consultation? What does it do?
Well, we're using that verbiage because I don't want to come problems, diseases like the BRCA gene or Alzheimer's gene, Parkinson's. I'm not trained or educated to talk about those big topics. You really go see a genetic counselor for that. And that's the type of thing that you can find out with your regular doctor or a geneticist, or some people are doing 23andMe and it looks at that. So it's really your option if you want to find that out. What I'm looking at is the biochemistry. So we're using that from a nutritional point of view. And nutrition is going to cover not only what you eat, but also vitamins and minerals that could be specific nutrients that could help that possible problem. So with genetics, it's a great foundation to simply see what is your body set up for. And the key is you never, never, never treat a genetic dysfunction. So if you see what we used to call a defect, if there's a problem, you don't say, "Oh, I have this problem." For instance, the MTHFR gene. If you have a variant, it doesn't mean you actually have a problem. It just means it's a possibility. You have to think about what could turn that gene on or off. Generally, going back
Hmm.
to diet and lifestyle, those are the things. High stress is going to turn these things on. And so it's nice to get a profile, and the what I look at, the software I use actually gives us about a 65-page report on somebody's raw data. And you can
Oh.
see, well, what are you set up for in terms of metabolism, potential for inflammation, being able to detoxify properly, creation of glutathione, which is our main cell protector and detoxifier. It also looks at some of the neurotransmitters, which can be really helpful for mood issues, especially if some people have tried certain medications and they may or may not have done well on them. This can help explain that to some extent. Also, it pertains to heart disease. It's a number of things. So it's a great place to say, well, here are some sticky points, if you will. I mean, nobody's going to have a clean genome. It just doesn't exist. But is it manifesting in real life? And you can determine that by symptom, categorizing it. Well, these genes can pertain to this particular symptom like low energy or depression, anxiety. But you would always want to, in my world, I would say clarify that with a lab. So if you see a lot of variants around MTHFR, well, and that's methylation, that's not the only thing going on with methylation. You have to look at B12. You have to look at a lot of different genes, BHMT, PEMT, GAMT. I mean, all these different acronyms with very long chemical names. But it's not just that one thing. So it opens up a can of worms,
Mm-hmm.
and people, in a sense, have to be ready for that, because we're not going to find out anything bad. I'm not going to find anything that says, ooh, you are going to develop a disease or you're going to develop cancer and you're going to die. We're not looking at it from that point of view at all. We want
Mm-hmm.
to look at the biochemistry and see some pitfalls, and then most likely do a laboratory to see what is the reality, what's happening right now. Let's stop that process and go back to when you were healthy by balancing things out, getting rid of the behavior or the food or taking the supplement that'll help you get better. And so it's a great thing to know about yourself. Every now and then, I've had this happen a few times where I've had people come in who had already dealt with cancer and they were on the upswing, they were doing good, but then they went to look at their genes, not around cancer specifically, but just things that might have influenced cellular change, such as potential for inflammation, not having enough cell protection. And I have this one case of a 35-year-old woman, I believe it was, who had cancer when she was around 25 for breast cancer. And it was just very clear in her genetics, the genes surrounding antioxidant production. She had all the variants, and I'd never seen that before. It's really fascinating for somebody to have cancer so young, to see in their genetic profile a real possibility of why that could have happened. Certainly, it's not the
Mm-hmm.
end all be all, but it was the type of thing that said, before we do any more testing, I just want you to start taking some antioxidants so that we can stop that in its tracks
Mm-hmm.
now. And then we'll do some more testing and see what else we need to do. So it's not usually that clear, but that's where I go with it.
Mm-hmm. So, given that genetic profile, do you actually can you actually find things like, I don't know, I don't know how much specific can you get, like don't eat certain types of foods, like are you gluten intolerant or like specific things, or is that like a whole different thing?
Well, I think a lot of the genetic software out there started off using 23andMe for their raw data, and
Mm-hmm.
23andMe includes that, and there's lactose intolerance as well as gluten
Mm-hmm.
intolerance. So the key word there's intolerance. It's looking at
Mm-hmm.
enzyme production, if you can break down those proteins in the body, or the sugars, I should say. Um, and if you have the variants, then it's the type of thing you try it on for size.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel when you eat gluten or dairy? People are so used to how they feel. They might say, well, I feel fine. You're like, well,
Right.
let's do an experiment. Go
Right.
a month without dairy and see how you feel, or go a month without gluten. And it's the funniest thing. People are like, oh, it's like the clouds lifted. I forgot I could feel this good.
Right. That's the new
So it'll tell
normal.
you things like that. Exactly. They just
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize they could feel so good. So it's
Interesting.
looking at enzymes. It's not looking at allergy. That's a whole different ball game. That's a different
Mm-hmm.
laboratory. But they also do peanut allergy. But there's really
Mm-hmm.
nothing else that
Right.
you could glean from the genetic report for foods.
Gotcha. What about, so you
Except,
mentioned
I'm
met.
sorry, I'm going to backtrack a second.
Mm-hmm.
There is something about how you digest your food, though,
Mm-hmm.
if you're thinking in that direction as well. Because if you're not digesting certain foods like fats or carbohydrates, then that can dictate your diet for sure if something just doesn't feel good in your belly.
Yeah, that's kind of like where I was going with that because it's like there's always new diets, right? New fad diets, like we got this, we got carnivore diet, we have vegan, vegetarian, then we have all these different variations, grapefruit diets, all these different things,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like people that are talking about those, and I've tried several, and some of them, like my body responded very well. Like I was on a carnivore diet, eating a lot of meat and a lot of fat, and I did blood work before and after, and guess what? I mean, with my system, with my body, my cholesterol actually went down. Whereas my
Mm-hmm.
doctor, when I was starting, I told her, it's like I'm going to be eating pretty much for a month and a half, just meat and a lot of fat,
Mm-hmm.
steak and
Mm-hmm.
organ meats and things like that. And she was like, well, you should probably, just the kind of routine response that you would probably get was just like, well, you should moderate with red meat because it's bad, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
did blood work before and after, and I understand that it is a snapshot. So I'm glad that you mentioned that because it's like that static test, like you said. But I did it several times, and my results were actually better. So my
Mm-hmm.
body, I'm not saying that I'm going to be eating meat exclusively all my life, but it seems that my body works with that better. Now I am going to try
Mm-hmm.
like vegetarian, doing vegetarian diet and vegan diet just to kind of see how my body
Mm-hmm.
responds with that as well, because I do like to
Mm-hmm.
experiment myself. But I'm just kind of not subscribing to this kind of, this diet is best, this is what you should eat, and
Mm-hmm.
period. I think that everyone should, because everybody is different on a genetic level, just a tiny little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to find exactly what their bodies are working with or not. So that's why I was asking about that genetic nutritional consultation
Mm-hmm.
and how far can we actually
Well,
find out.
yeah, I completely agree. Ultimately, you have to try different things on for size. The only caveat I would give is understanding how your body processes food. So for instance, with the diets that are high in proteins and fats, low in carbohydrate, eating primarily vegetables, that definitely is better in terms of reducing your insulin, reducing your blood sugar, reducing cholesterol. Plenty of research on there. It absolutely can work for you. But if you are a cycling woman and you try to eat that few carbohydrates, most of the time you
Mm,
do not do well at all. It might change the blood work, but you feel horrible in the meantime because women of reproductive years really need those extra carbohydrates. So you can start with, a philosophy or an ideology around this food, but then you have to take the individual into consideration and just try it on. And that's what we're realizing. And certainly genetically, if you're not set up to process a ketogenic diet, for instance, and you're eating all this fat and you're following all the rules, but you feel terrible, well, if you're
mm-hmm,
eating all this fat, but you're not metabolizing it well, you're creating a ton of inflammation in your body.
mm-hmm,
And there are tools that you can use around that if you feel like the diet's worth pursuing, in that position, eating more carnitine or enzymes or something to help you process that fat, it can still work, but that's something extra you're going to have to do for yourself.
mm-hmm,
And one other little caveat to keep in mind is although the higher fat diets I don't think are necessarily bad for us, we do have to be concerned about the quality of those fats. They have to be organic. The grass fed, the free range, all that is absolutely necessary because the toxins in our environment are lipophilic. They
yeah,
like to go and store
mm-hmm.
themselves in fats. So the more fat you eat, the more toxicity you could be exposed to,
Yeah, I totally
even in an
agree.
organic process.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's just floating in our environment. Nobody's truly organic anymore.
right. That is so true. And I guess I should have prefaced that's kind of like the baseline and the understanding that you have to go with quality. It doesn't matter where you're going to eat if
Yeah.
it's going to be no good quality, highly processed, or just like not organically raised, not grass fed, and not quality. Then yeah, you can eat all you want and you're still going to feel sick because those are the constituents that will be
Hmm.
floating in your bodies.
Right. And
Mm-hmm,
just like the pescatarian diet, it's so unfortunate that, omega-3 fatty acids are so plentiful in our cold water fish, but
mm-hmm,
there's absolutely no seafood in the world that is pure anymore. It's all
mm-hmm.
going to contain mercury. And the
Right.
shellfish have a ton of arsenic in it. Anything that isn't basically in the, Alaskan waters are going to have PCBs. And I mean, there's a
Right.
lot of problems with
What are your
seafood,
thoughts on
unfortunately.
What are your thoughts on the GAPS diet? And there's some work done by, um, uh, gosh, what's the name of the doctor? Natasha Campbell McBride, I think, is her name, and she she proposes, or she says that if your system is, I guess that's kind of like self-explanatory. If your system is optimally, working, if your body's working, it actually can handle higher levels of toxins and of even metals out of
Mhm.
fish. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I agree. If you have a better integrity of your barrier against the world, then you're not going to be as sick. So if
Mm-hmm.
you have a digestive system that's trashed for one reason or another, lots of inflammation, you have to think about what does that look like. So I always explain it to my patients as we have these tight gap junctions between the cells of the intestinal lining, and they kind of look like this. And if they get irritated and inflamed, they're going to puff up and kind of pull apart a teeny bit, and you're going to have this microscopic alleyway for things to get across from the digestive system into the bloodstream that it normally doesn't, and then you're going to react to that. And that's where things such as food allergies come in. So if you have a strong barrier between you and the outside world, then hopefully things will just pass through and you're going to tolerate it a lot better. Similar situation to what's going on with mold exposure these days. Lots of people are having mold problems now. Do we have more mold now than we did 50 years ago? I'm not entirely sure, but I bet it's kind of the same. But why is it so much worse now? Why are we not tolerating it as well? Maybe even somewhat related to Lyme disease. What is making it harder on us to tolerate normal things?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where this further burden on the immune system, and about 75 or more, maybe 80% of our immune system lives in our digestive system. So if the lining is irritated, our immune system is working harder, we're going to have overreactivity. We're going to absorb stuff that we don't want to, and we're going to feel terrible. So I agree from that point of view. Having that strong barrier, you can pass more things out of the body, but still, if you're eating fish every day, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
get that mercury one way or another.
So what can be done about that, since it's such a good source of those omega-3s and fatty acids?
Yeah, well, the happy medium is to probably not eat it at all. So that's not really much of a happy medium, but that's the way to avoid it. I do a lot of heavy metal testing. The only time I've seen low levels of mercury are in vegans.
Mm.
And so if you are not a vegan, I'm not suggesting that you need to be, but if you enjoy seafood, try whenever possible to eat the Alaskan wild caught omega-3 fishes like cod and salmon. If you're in a restaurant, you need to specify with the waiter, where does this fish come from? Because it might just say salmon. And if it does, it's probably Atlantic or Norwegian or Scottish. Unfortunately, it's all really contaminated. If it doesn't say wild caught Pacific, you basically should avoid it. If you're eating at home and you're eating these fish, that happy medium is maybe once or twice a week. Ultimately, you can always test for these things. You can do whole blood mercury levels with any doctor if they're willing to make that order, but it's just a regular blood test, and you can keep it under the level that it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the area, it might be below 4 or 10 by the reference range on the blood work. In my practice, in addition to that, I use urine testing to look at a much more wide range of other heavy metals, and it's a little bit more specific. We actually use the CDC, very narrow reference ranges, but you just keep track of it and you monitor it. And
Mm-hmm.
if you love your fish, then let's just make sure it's not hurting you. And you can kind of couple that with more antioxidants, more glutathione, things to protect you. Ensuring that you have enough minerals in your body actually can be very helpful, because minerals and heavy metals are very similar in terms of molecular weight, and they like to get into the heavy metals like to get into the receptors where the minerals are supposed to go. So if the minerals are already taking up space in that
Mm.
receptor, the heavy metal can't get in there as much. So that helps as well. But nothing's going to help eating fish 7 days a week, and unfortunately just having that heavy exposure.
You just shut down my
I know.
sushi craving.
Yes, I know. It's very sad. A lot of people love sushi in this area too, and unfortunately it's just not right for you anymore.
Got to move to Japan, maybe. I don't know. Maybe they are closer to. They
You
eat a
know,
lot, or is it
I
just the opposite?
know. That's the same toxicity.
Mm.
Yeah, there's nowhere in the world where you can avoid toxicity.
Hmm. Well, it's going to kill you in the end.
I know, I know. You get to this frustrated point of, well, what do I do? We live in a toxic world, so what do we do? Well, you
Right.
understand how your body handles it. What
Mm-hmm.
can you do to protect yourself? Do you have to do anything extra than the average person? Clean up your environment, eat organic, drink clean water, drink or breathe clean air. Those are your basics. There are testings that you can do to make sure everything's kind of on an even keel. And then you just eat a healthy diet and try not to worry about it. Maybe test once a year or so and see where you're at, and you live with it. But you can you can clear up a lot of stuff just by cleaning up your own environment. Clean air, clean food, clean water.
So that leads me
That's
to
all
the
there is to
next
it.
question. Detoxification. That's a big term. It's used everywhere. This detoxifies. This detoxifies. What are your thoughts on that? How are you going about like detoxifying someone? Let's say they have a lab test, and they're heavy on, let's say, I don't know, there's heavy metals or something that you want to clear out of the body. How do you go about that?
It depends on what the heavy metal is. So that's a really big issue because you have to go to somebody who knows what they're doing. It is a specific training. It's not a simple or a light task to undertake, because when you go in and you try to grab onto these heavy metals, you have to make sure they stay bound and they don't recirculate and make you more sick. So it's a very specific testing using urine and sometimes provocative agents to figure out what's actually the best thing for pulling something out after you know what it is, because metals are specific to different medicines. And so it's not really the most natural thing that you're going to find, but heavy metals aren't really natural anyway to have it in our bodies. So that's a bit of a big complicated question, because you have to do a pre and a post testing, and in a sense we're not detoxifying. That's not the best word for this particular situation. It's really more of a cleansing. So after we
So what is
figure
the
out
main
what
what
the
is the main
potential,
difference? What's the main difference between
well,
detoxifying and cleansing?
it's medical systems. So toxicologists are really the best people to use the word detoxify or toxins, whereas we're not toxicologists, so we're not working in that realm. We're working, again, in the more functional realm of, we've done a test, we see some heavy metals existing in your body. Now we have to determine by symptom as well, is it a smart idea? Is it going to be beneficial to actually get some of this stuff out? So you relate it to what symptoms you have going on as well. And if it's low enough and there aren't enough symptoms present, then you'll just let it go and say, this is what it is, and I don't think they're causing you a problem, because nobody's going to have zero heavy metals in their bodies
Right.
unless they're not detoxifying at all, or releasing these metals at all, I should say. Otherwise, then that's a different problem. So if you find there are some levels that are high enough to warrant treatment, you have symptoms also saying that, then you use an oral medication, or you can use an IV depending on what's present. And the trick to it is you have to do it consistently enough, long enough, and you have to also add in other nutrients to make sure you don't cause an imbalance, because the medicines that you use to take out these heavy metals will also take out your own nutrients, your minerals, and there's no way around it. That's how they work. So they're very strict protocols that you follow to make sure you don't cause an imbalance, make somebody more sick. So that's the one time where you're not freeform at all. You follow a very specific protocol because it's a bit serious. You are putting something into somebody's body to physically grab onto a heavy metal, pull it back out of the soft tissue, because that's where heavy metals like to go, your organs basically, and pull it back out into the digestive system, the urinary system, and you pee and poop it out. And you're replacing the minerals at the same time. And that can last a while, and there's really no end point, truly, because nobody's going to get heavy metals out of their body permanently, or
Right.
all it, you can't get it all out because we're exposed to it every day. But you get it down to a level where your symptoms aren't bothering you anymore and you start to feel healthy. And then you taper off of that, and you just make sure that you have a healthy lifestyle and add in some more nutrients. And the treatment changes to be more holistic for what that person needs at that time. But the removal or the cleansing of heavy metals it can be a little bit long. It's not going to be a month or two, probably more like a year or 2 years.
Wow.
But it can make all the difference in the world for some
Oh
people.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Especially if someone was chronically ill for a long time and kind of finally pinpointed that this was the issue. Obviously, it's going to take a long time to clean that up, but it's absolutely worthwhile
Right.
doing. What
Right,
else
and
do
you
you
have other
detoxify
things.
for? What else do you kind of want
Right.
to remove out of the body other than like metals?
There are solvents and there are herbicides and pesticides, plastics like phthalates. The pesticides are relatively easy. Actually, you just stop eating non-organic food, and they have such short half-lives that most
Stop
of the time
eating
that
crap
comes out
food
on
and you're
its
going to be
own.
fine, people.
Exactly. That is what it boils down to, really. But the other more sticky things like your solvents and your phthalates, that takes a little bit more trouble. So it's always going back and identifying where is it coming from. If you don't
Hmm.
figure that out, you're not going to get anywhere. So how much plastic do you have in your life? Are you drinking from a plastic water bottle? Are you eating out of plastic dishes, heating things up in plastic dishes? Anything that could possibly get into your body, make sure it's not plastic. End all be
Hmm.
all, no matter what. So get rid of that, and then you can use things to support your detoxifying systems like glutathione and acetylcysteine, various minerals, and then saunas. Saunas are sort of the best cure for almost everything.
Yes, I wanted to talk to you about that because that's one of the things
Yeah.
that you have listed over here as well, and specifically the far infrared sauna. Let's talk about that for a
hmm
second. I want to, obviously, I've been to a sauna. I tried different ones, even including the far infrared. Why is far infrared so different, superior, different? What's the difference?
hmm Well, it's the wavelength of light. So far infrared is describing a certain wavelength, and it can penetrate into the body an inch and a half to 2 inches. So I think of it as getting down to the cellular level and kind of heating you up from the inside out and just releasing the toxins more easily. Plus, it's more tolerable. I hate heat. I can't do it at all. Washington, D.C., humid summers, I just melt. I get depressed. I go inside. I don't come out again until October. But the far infrared sauna, I can actually handle. We turn the sauna up to only 130, 140. Most traditional saunas are more like 200. And the point of
Hmm.
that is you want to stay in there as long as possible without overheating, dehydrating. Of course, you're careful with that. But most regular saunas, you're going to stay in there for 5, 10 minutes. Depends on your tolerance. But it's just super hot. Now, the main point with any sauna that you use is to sweat. If you're
Sweat,
sweating,
right?
you're doing a good thing.
Hmm.
But the far infrared sauna, to me, it's much more tolerable. It feels like I'm just sweating from the inside out. It feels deeper to me, and I can stay in there for a full 30 minutes. So the longer
Hmm.
you're in there, the longer you sweat, the better it is. Plus, even if you're not a great sweater, and a lot of people actually, it's ironic, they have maybe 5 saunas and it's 130 degrees and they don't sweat.
Hmm.
Well, they have a problem. You have to be able to sweat, especially women. They don't sweat as easily as men most often. And so the sauna helps train you to sweat better. So by the end of their sauna series, usually, they're sweating like they're supposed to and getting rid of all this stuff, and they're wiping it off with a towel, and then they're going home immediately and showering so they don't reabsorb this. But you're able to stay in there for 30 to 60 minutes, 130 degrees, 140 degrees, and it's just going to accelerate your healing process so much more because you're actually physically removing this stuff, and then you're taking the antioxidants and nutrients to heal your body, heal the damage that those pesticides or the phthalates were causing. And that's, I feel like, where the healing is. If I again had my druthers and my person was in their ashram, I'd have them do a sauna every single day for at
Every
least an
single day.
hour.
Wow. What
Yeah.
about just like just on a regular basis? If let's say you don't have symptoms or any major issues that you're dealing with preventively, how often would you do
hmm
a sauna?
Ideal world every day still, because you're
Every
going to
day.
have exposure to toxins.
Mm.
Yeah, ideal. But
Hmm.
if you're not sick and you just want to be healthy, probably a couple times a week.
Wow. Okay. Time to get a
Yeah,
sauna at home.
absolutely. It's a wonderful thing.
I
And
want to
it's
take
winter,
you.
so that'd be perfect.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, there's something to be said. People have been doing saunas for eons. Now we have this kind of extra technologically advanced sauna with the far infrared, frequencies being able to penetrate the skin and go deeper, as you said. Um, but I want to take you back to something that you mentioned about. Uh, was it not fungus? It was mold, right? Moldy,
Mm-hmm.
and our ability to cope with that. I have a friend of mine who's been kind of struggling with that, and he kind of blames everything on mold. And I was interested to hear your opinion, like, since maybe you probably can't take out as much mold as you think because it's pretty much everywhere. I mean, obviously you can
Mm-hmm.
minimize it to, sanitize the environment and what have you. But how do people deal with mold when they're like having some kind of negative symptoms caused by it?
You really just have to get it out of your environment. I've had some very mold sensitive sick people in my practice as well. And the only way they got started getting better was to get out of that environment. I actually had a man sell his condo. I mean, he went through mold remediation, so he didn't sell it moldy, but he became so sensitive to it. Even after he got rid of the mold, he still couldn't go back into the condo and feel okay. There's always some little bit of residue that's
Mm-hmm.
typically not going to make you sick, but that's what happens with mold. A lot of people, they
Mm-hmm.
get the exposure, they get sick, and then will always have a sensitivity to it, it seems like. So for those people, I think it's much more about their genetics. There are some mold genes that can have variants and make it harder for them to deal with mold. They're more susceptible to having problems. I'm not an expert in that per se, but I just know that does exist. And there are a lot of mold experts in this area who would know a lot more than I do. But
Mm-hmm.
you would still want to work with the immune system. That's what it comes down to. When somebody's reacting to something, what's going on with the immune system? So if you've gotten rid of the mold, you're doing the antioxidants, you're doing some other more specific treatment for the mold, why aren't you getting better? Well, what's getting in your way? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? What's your stress levels like? How's your digestion? How is your whole body working? Not just this one little thing, little big, but it's one thing. You have a
Mm-hmm.
whole other big old body that you have to deal with. And if you're not, then I think that's what holds people back from truly getting well, only focusing on that one problem.
Right. It's a complex system, complex problem. So you gotta look at the variables that are affecting you and try to remove them, and then help your body heal itself by building up the immune system. It's what it sounds like is a
Hmm.
good way to go.
Yeah.
So another topic that I wanted to talk to you about, and let me just use my little cheat sheet over here, is the you mentioned this. Gosh, what was it? Something with was it methylizing?
Methylate.
Methylate. Yes. Let's talk about that because I had it like I was like I wanted to put a little ribbon on my finger, like not to forget to talk about that. What is it?
Yep.
Why does it matter? And tell me more.
Well, methylation is something that we're definitely just starting to understand. It's a biochemical process that happens inside every single cell in your body, and it's related to how you feel in terms of energy, mood, sleep, detoxification through the production of glutathione, basically everything, but you need specific nutrients to make the process work. First and foremost, you have to eat protein. Beyond that, you have to digest and absorb it. So you have to, again, go back to square one, getting
Mm-hmm.
it into your body so the process can happen in the first place. So then your body breaks that protein down into methionine, one of the amino acids. And then it goes through this process of becoming homocysteine, another amino acid. And then it's supposed to recycle back up into methionine. So it's supposed to have this constant recycling, methionine, homocysteine, methionine, homocysteine. The problem occurs if that recycling does not happen. Too much homocysteine is made because it's not recycling properly, so it builds up. When it builds up, it increases inflammation. Very pertinent to problems with related to heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, and osteoporosis potentially. Aside from the other things I just named, the other symptoms I just named, like energy and mood,
Mm-hmm.
glutathione production. So the breakdown can come genetically because there are a lot of different genes involved in this. Um, Probably about 10 to 15 that I can just think of right now, but specific nutrients that you have to actually be able to activate and use methylfolate, methyl B12, B6. You have to have enough CTH, which is the gene that brings down cysteine to make your glutathione. So it's a lot of different things going on in there. And it can sometimes be a little bit tricky because you can find these things on the shelves. So I'm glad FDA isn't so involved that they're controlling all of our supplements. It would make life a lot harder on everybody. But sometimes you think, ooh, maybe that one actually should be controlled. Because if somebody finds out that they have a gene variant with the MTHFR gene, which is the gene, one of the genes that activates our folate, and they get excited and say, I'm just going to take methylfolate and it'll cure me. Well, you might feel better on it, that's true, but if you try a high dose and your body is not equipped to handle it because of these variants or there's some other factors happening, it can make you feel much worse, very anxious, very inflamed, very irritated. And then if you stop taking the supplement, you'll go back to normal. But but that's why people don't always react well to this. So I like to do a blood test and actually see precisely where the breakdown is occurring. But beyond that, understanding the genetics first, so you know where the potential pitfalls are. doing that test, okay, great. So we know what's happening, but you know what? Using that folate, that's the very last thing that we're going to do. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you have too many interfering factors like a bad diet, too much stress, too much inflammation from potentially even, organisms, say you're dealing with SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and that's just complicating everything. There's a lot of stuff you have to deal with before you get to that last step of folate. It's like you have to peel back those layers of onion, and folate's in the middle, and that's the very
Mm-hmm.
last thing you're going to use because it's powerful. It's just going to push you in that right direction. If your body's not ready to handle it, it makes you feel 1,000 times worse. So methylation
Mm-hmm.
is essential, but you have to know how your body's going to work with it.
So what are some of the? So you mentioned low energy level. That seems like anybody can say that. Like, I just feel tired. Yeah, get some sleep first. But
hmm
beyond that, if it kind of persists,
hmm
this could be one of the root causes. You say.
Right. Yeah. Mostly because of that B12 and that folate. There's a gene involved called GAMT that helps make creatine from our SAMI. SAMI is actually a nutrient that you'll find
Mm-hmm.
on the shelf. And if you use this SAMI, a lot of people use it for depression, and it can often work, but it's part of that methylation pathway. So when you take more SAMI, you're going to go down that pathway. The GAMT gene is going to get involved. You're going to make more creatine, which a lot of bodybuilders use for muscle mass. So that can help with energy too. So if you push it in the wrong direction, you can actually have negative consequences. But hopefully, if you get the methylation right, it will translate into better energy, but it's almost a side effect. So although I do work with methylation in my practice, it's almost on the outskirts because there's so many other things you have to look at first.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always going back to stress. I mean, it sounds so simple. We'll just treat your stress levels. Well, if you don't, it's really hard to make progress.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of simple in that way. So while it can be really exciting to talk about really specific biochemical processes and understand what's going on with these things, that's one little bit of chemistry. It's almost like thinking about how to use a drug. It's really exciting to have that control over a pathway in the body using a drug. You can make something happen. And if it cures somebody and they feel better, great. But what's going to happen 30 years down the road? So you still have to be careful with these natural remedies or even thinking, these fun, exciting thoughts that are more in the naturopathic world or the natural world. There are a lot of medical doctors who are also looking into methylation, but it's a hot topic, and it's one that I try to treat with kid gloves just because it can open up a can of worms. And I've had a lot of people do great and a lot of people do terribly, if you don't
Mm.
get it quite right. So
Right.
it's just something you have to back off from and say, okay, well, we know this is a problem, especially if we've done a genetic profile and we see a lot
Mm-hmm.
of different things going on, and we've done some testing so we know what's what. And we're like, okay, well, we know we have to fix these other things before we can even get to that point. And those are the more sensitive people. Every now and then,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody is healthy and we feel like, you know what, we're willing to experiment a little bit, we'll try a little combination for methylation specifically, great. But if I have somebody coming in with mold sensitivity and Lyme's disease and chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia, absolutely not. We're going to back off and find out more root cause of where all this came from, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll have to start more bare bones than that.
Speaking of um, nutrients, vitamins, and elements that we buy off buy on the in the store. What is your opinion and thoughts on the bioidentical things or like synthetically produced vitamins versus vitamins derived from plants or just eating an apple instead of like, hey, I'm looking for vitamin C
hmm
and I need
hmm
2,000,000% because I need 2,000,000% because more is better, right?
hmm 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 Right, right. Always.
Always, right? Like, why do we even? So that's another question that let me just kind of jump around a little bit over here. Why do we like if there's a daily recommended value and it says for let's say
hmm
vitamin D, and you go on to a store and there's a bottle that says like, oh yeah, this has 20,000 units of that. Like, why do they
Right.
even do that other than like marketing purposes? Because people say like, oh, well, that's a better deal. Like, I'm going to get 20,000% more. Why is that happening? I've never understood that.
Well, the RDA was developed to find out what do human beings need to simply live. And that means laying on your back flat, breathing, not doing anything. So RDA, again, is sort of like a jumping off point, but it's absolutely something that we don't pay attention to. It's bare bones. So
Mm-hmm.
when you get a vitamin that is several hundred or 1,000% higher than the RDA, it's not a scary thing. It's a concentration, and that I think has developed over out of need. People are having problems, and research has been done, and different trials have happened so that certain milligram amounts can help a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to diet though. I mean, in my program, we get a ton of nutrition, so we know much more than the average doctor, but we're not true nutritionists in that way. Some of us can develop our practice around nutrition and really project ourselves as that. But what I do is I like to get an idea of what's going on with somebody and maybe tweak their diet a little bit. If they need more in-depth work, then they actually see a nutritionist. And that's a starting point. You have to eat well. I don't want people to live on pills. They've actually done research on that. You die. There's no way you can just not eat good food and only take a pill. You could have a horrible fast food diet and take a multivitamin. It's not going to be good enough. So I don't really use multivitamins in my practice even. People come to see me with specific problems, so I'm going to create a plan around that. But
Mm-hmm.
as few pills as possible is what you need, because you ultimately want to get your nutrition from your diet. If you know that you have personal issues or a disease state, then we're going to be really specific around that. So when you're shopping around at the health food store, everything sounds fun and exciting. And I can't tell you how many people I've had come in with 2 grocery bags full of vitamins. I mean, more than 50 vitamins, and they're taking it every day. That's almost as bad as taking multiple drugs every day. There can be interactions in the body. You're probably doubling up too much on something. There are upper limits of some vitamins. Some can be toxic if they're too high.
Right.
And that is available in the store. And if you don't know that, you can easily cause yourself a problem.
Right.
It's
typically the oil soluble ones that I hear that, because those are the ones that body can't
the
like
fat
easily.
soluble.
Fat
Yeah,
soluble,
vitamin A and D.
But,
Yeah.
So how do you know?
I mean,
How do you
most
know
of
what
the
the
time,
levels are? How do you know what the healthy levels for you are?
well, you can do a test.
I like it, science.
You can you can keep it simple and just eat specific ways, because we know certain nutrients are in certain foods. And if you feel a certain way, I'm not feeling very energetic, but I'm also eating a lot of fast food, then, sometimes that's just a logical choice. But if you're eating well and you just can't figure it out, there's a micronutrient blood and urine test that I do called a NutriVal that shows you very precisely, well, these are the vitamins and minerals that you're deficient in. And you can use it that simply and say, okay, well, I'm going to supplement with a multivitamin that covers all those things, and maybe tweak in a couple little others that we need a higher amount, because no multivitamin is going to have enough B12 or vitamin D in it. And then be happy with that, and maybe come away with 2 or 3 supplements. What's always low on those tests are the omega-3 fatty acids, always. So almost everybody needs to take an omega-3. Almost everybody needs to take some glutathione. I'm not saying do this right now. You should probably test it out yourself, but there are ways of finding this out if altering your own diet and eating in a practical way isn't quite doing it for you. There are tests for this.
So how often should people do, let's say if somebody just feels they think right, which is debatable too, because you may feel something throughout your whole life and feel like, oh, I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling okay, just to later find out that you remove some kind of irritant in your life, and suddenly like, oh my gosh, I feel like 10 times better now, right? So even that baseline is debatable. But hypothetically, let's say if someone feels it's generally healthy, how often should they do a test? Should it be sort of like a annual physical test when they do a run through, like in addition to this regular blood work, which is going to do the regular counts, but like those more specific things in like deficiencies, whether it's deficiencies in specific nutrients, or maybe or vitamins, or anything else. How often do you think?
Yeah, probably once a year would be a good touchstone. The older you are, probably a little bit more often. All things considered, if you aren't having any digestive problems or any stress problems, lack of sleep, anything to cause pressure on the body, once a year is probably okay. If I really had my way, I'd also have them do an environmental panel to see if there are potential problems coming down the road, because these chemicals will get into our bodies, and then we don't have problems 4 or 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road where we forgot we got exposed to something that many decades ago, and now it's becoming a problem. So that's a great question. And, if I could put together some sort of grand executive annual physical, I'd probably put the NutriVal in there and all the environmental things. Those would probably be my top ones, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some blood work would be okay just for basic things. Make sure the hormones are working well because hormones literally run the body, and there's a lot to be said for balanced hormones. And most people can see how imbalanced they are just by how they feel, but that's another grand topic we can get into if you like. There's a lot to be said about that one.
You see my eyes just light up because that was another one that I wanted to talk to you about. I have it on my little cheat sheet
Great.
over here, which is, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, and I would love to
Yeah.
learn more about that because to me it's very fascinating, where you have. What is bioidentical? You have these concepts of like, okay, so it's a vitamin, is synthetically, it's a compound, it's a molecule identical to something that occurs in nature. My understanding, simplified, and we're going to get into hormones as well, but if two compounds chemically are the same, they technically should work the same, right? However, my understanding is that if you take a vitamin, let's say if you, I don't know, add some lemon into your tea, that lemon and
Mhm.
lemon, the acid over there and everything that the lemon gives you is just more than just that one molecule. You have a whole slew of compounds that kind of go along with for the ride, and they may
Mhm.
enable things for your body to digest, absorb, and make it more bioavailable. Is it the
Mhm.
same with hormones? Like, let's talk about hormones.
So bioidentical hormones are truly identical to what your own body makes. So the hormones themselves are derived from natural products. So estrogen and testosterone are derived from soy. Progesterone is derived from the herb wild yam, also known as Dioscorea. So those foods or herbs in and of themselves could be considered natural hormone support. You can also concentrate that into an over-the-counter cream, but it's still a natural hormone. It becomes bioidentical when it goes into the laboratory and you actually chemically change it to make it identical to a human hormone. So it is a little bit of a chemical process, but it's still using a natural substance to begin with, just tweaking it to make it identical. And the point of it really is, if you think in terms of how it's going to react in the body, you have to think about the receptor. So if you have a receptor and you're using a natural substance, it can work because it'll get into the receptor and work a little bit, but you can see it's not a perfect fit. Whereas a
Mm-hmm.
bioidentical hormone is going to fit perfectly and it's going to have a stronger reaction and your body's going to recognize it easier. And that also makes a
Oh.
difference with after your body's done with that hormone or what have you, your body has to get rid of it. And if it's natural, then the body knows what to do with it. If it's chemical, it's a lot harder on the body. The chemical's a lot bigger, so it's just harder on the liver, which is where a lot of this detoxification comes from to get it out of the body and with fewer side effects. So bioidentical hormones are extremely useful, but they are a medicine, they are a prescription. So it's something that we take quite seriously. If it's appropriate to prescribe to somebody, it's kind of a pain for them at first because I'm really, really strict with it. If you're a candidate for hormone therapy, then you're probably a menopausal woman having the classic signs of hot flashes, night sweats, all kinds of things. And we want to talk about this, but I'm going to lay it out for you. That's not your only way to go. If that's what you feel strongly about, you've done your own research, you're convinced that's the way to go, great. We'll start looking at that to see if you're a good candidate. But otherwise, keep in mind, there are herbs we can use. We can use the over-counter concentrated standardized creams in a non-prescription way. So if all that's been discussed and we really want to go down the hormone route, I need to have some blood work on file just to know where your levels are. If you're a menopausal woman, they're going to be low, but that's fine. We just want to make sure they're where they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
I need a current normal pap and mammogram. And there's a lot of debate about mammogram, but I need to have this mammogram on file because we need to prove that you don't have cancer, because we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to add hormones to a cancer state. Nobody wants that. So we want to make sure there's no fire occurring that we're going to add to. So we do take the hormones very seriously because they interact with the same receptors that the synthetic hormones do. The Prempro, Premrim, and Provera, the estrogens and the progesterones that you can get in prescription. There's a lot of natural prescriptions, so that's not the only thing that people are using. I think people are shying away from that now, but just to give you that kind of comparison, we put them in the same category that it potentially can cause problems down the road. You can't use it and say, well, there's no potential for cancer here. hormones don't cause cancer, but if you have that potential for one reason or another, and you add a hormone to that, then it could compound that and potentially bring you down that road. So
Hmm.
we do a lot to make sure that you're a good candidate, that it's safe for you to use this. We do the blood work, make sure we have the normal pap and mammogram, and then we give you a 2-month trial on it and see how you feel. And then we tweak it, and that's the beauty of the bioidenticals. A compounding pharmacy is going to make it precisely to what I think you need, within a certain range, but it's not going to be standard. It's going to be, well, these are your symptoms. This is what your lab said, and I think this is the right dose for you. So try this on for size for a couple of months, and let's see
Hmm.
where we go. Okay, you come back, and maybe we need to tweak it a little bit. Then we just change the prescription, or guess what? You can just take a little bit more cream, so you don't have to change the whole prescription. So there's a lot more uh, customizing that you can do with this, and they're going to have some preservatives in there. You really can't sell a pharmacy can't give you a cream without some preservatives, so we
Hmm.
can't bypass that, unfortunately. So it's not 100% natural in that way. There will be some preservatives or fillers, but the active substance in and of itself is going to be natural. It's a lot more tolerable. Your body deals with it a lot better. You can customize it. And then after somebody's been on a certain protocol for a few months, I'll have them do a much more specific functional test using urine, and we use urine over 4 or 5 different samples, which not only looks at your hormones, but it also looks at your stress levels, your adrenals, because that's
Hmm.
really the cornerstone of any hormone health. You hear stress again. So I know we keep coming back to stress, but that really is the main root of all evil, aside from inflammation, but stress is causing inflammation too. So we look at that, but then we look at the hormones, we break down the estrogens and see how well your body's using those estrogens. So we make not just one estrogen, we make estrone, estradiol, and estriol. And the hormone combination that is typically given in the compound world is going to be a combination of estradiol and estriol. 80% of it is generally estriol, E3, which is our safest, weakest, most protective estrogen. So we want most of that. And then we add in a little bit of estradiol, 20%, because that's going to give you more of that hormone protection, more of the hormone strength to help with symptoms.
Hmm.
Plus, some of that estradiol is going to make the third hormone, estrone, which we do not put into the compound because that one's considered a little bit more aggressive. Whenever we have what we call estrogen dominant symptoms with women, usually they have problems around their cycles. It's going too much into this estrogen, or that estrogen, after it breaks down, there are more metabolites to be had. You can go into what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly metabolites. So how negative of an effect do those metabolites have on your body?
Hmm.
And so the lab actually shows you all of that, which is really the most beneficial part, especially if you're on that estrogen. Because if you find by using that estrogen, it's okay, you've been using it for a few months and now we're doing a test, that's all right. We see where you are. Okay, we don't have to change that estrogen if it's giving you good estrogen levels and you're feeling good on it, but we see it's not going down the best pathway. There are other nutrients that we can use to tweak it and kind of shunt it toward the right pathway. So
Hmm.
that's what I ask every woman to do. They can't get out of it. I'm not going to give you a prescription unless you are going to do this test, because I'm not going to put you in harm's way. And so we really do take it that seriously.
Hmm.
In addition to that, it also looks at the progesterone, the testosterone. It actually looks at inflammation numbers and just a whole bunch of fun stuff. So that's the whole kit and caboodle. So it's kind of a big
Hmm.
thing to get started, but after you get on the hormones, then if you're doing well, you see me once or twice a year and you're good.
What starts you on that path of the hormone replacement, bioidentical hormone replacement? Is it just a stage in your life if women are premenopausal or menopausal, or is there like other things that are affecting the hormones? I mean, obviously stress, right, is going to be affecting,
Mhm.
because my understanding is that hormones are like body's regulators.
Mhm.
So when do you typically start with that hormone therapy? What is precipitating that people coming into you with issues? What are those?
Well, they'll come to me. It's not something I tell them that they have to do,
Hmm.
because menopause is not a disease.
Right.
It's a collection of symptoms that we have termed menopause. There are some cultures in this world that don't even have a word for menopause because they just don't go
Hmm.
through it. They
Yeah.
have an entire different, community and diet, lifestyle, so it's very different. Um, so if a woman gets uncomfortable, usually it's looking like I can't sleep, I have no energy, my brain went out the door, I just don't feel like myself. if we've looked at everything else and there's no other obvious thing, and if she's of that menopausal age, then we can probably say, well, this is probably the issue. We probably don't even need to do a blood test to
Mm-hmm.
get into that, to diagnosis, but in order to do the bioidenticals, we would. So they come to me first because they're not feeling like themselves. And then we discuss the different options. If it's a premenopausal woman, then they're having issues around their menstrual cycle, whether it's PMS or pain during their periods or spotting, even the development of uterine fibroids, ovarian cysts, fibrocystic breast disease. Usually this is due to an estrogen dominance, not all the time, but that's the most common form. And so in a cycling woman, it's especially important to dig into this a little bit further and see, well, what do we need to do to help either get out these excess estrogens from your body or help your body process it better? Or most likely what the cause is, you have a lot of stress and it's just eating up your progesterone. There are
Mm-hmm.
very few women who don't experience some issue around their cycle. And it most often goes back to how stress affecting you and what's going on with your progesterone. And from that point of view, I don't always find it useful to do testing because a cycling woman, their hormones, should be on a regular cycle. But when you get down to having a problem, things fluctuate and change. And so the blood work or even the urine work can look a bit misleading if they don't match the symptoms. So with that case, I usually just go according to symptom. We
Mm-hmm.
know what's supposed to happen. And if you're not matching that pattern, then let's do some simple tweaks. We
Mm-hmm.
can try the natural herbs like Vitex or Dioscorea, or, what I would probably test for is the stress again, just to go back to that and make sure that's not complicating your hormones, because stress just eats up your progesterone. And so that's how I would approach the premenopausal woman and the postmenopausal woman. And going back to the hormones for a moment, another reason to use hormones, if it's not just for symptoms, it could be for a medical problem, such as osteoporosis. If a
Mm-hmm.
woman is losing bone mass and we can't identify why, and most of the time we can't, we know it happens, and we have different medications to try to stop that, but those aren't always great either. Well, what's supposed to make bone growth? Healthy estrogen, progesterone, testosterone levels. Of course, diet's a factor. Strength exercising is actually the biggest factor. So hormones can be helpful to help stabilize those bones and certain nutrients. Calcium is not the end all be all. I don't actually use a lot of calcium.
Mm-hmm.
Usually women have plenty of calcium in their bodies from their diet. It's all about the micronutrients and the other minerals. It's about magnesium and all those trace minerals. So you get all this calcium in the body, and that's great, but now your body has to put it somewhere. So hopefully it's going to the bones and not the arteries of the heart. So it goes to the bones, but what's going to keep it there? All your trace minerals. So, it's a shame when people come in and they're just taking maybe a calcium. Well, that's great, but I doubt it's helping you. You need a much more complex bone support. And even a bit above that, you have to do weight-bearing exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes a rather specific weight-bearing, like strength training, not just walking, because most people are actually doing the right thing. They're usually eating okay. They're usually walking or exercising somewhat, but they're not getting any better. You have to actually kind of hunker down and do some serious strength training, because the bigger your muscles are, the more pressure they put on your bones, and the bones respond to that, and they strengthen to support the heavier body. So
A
that's why we
case,
worry about,
a case where
huh?
stress is actually positive.
Yes, exercise can be a positive stress unless you take it too far. That's why those elite athletes, they are super stressed. They have a ton of oxidative stress happening, and that's actually not the healthiest thing you could do in the world.
That is true. But there's that balance. So that's what I wanted to talk to you
Yeah,
about. Like, how do you
always.
find that balance? Because, and I had a really interesting conversation with a book author, and she wrote a book about utilizing stress, or harnessing stress rather. And stress is positive to a certain degree, and then it's kind of like a bell curve, right? It's good, 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 and then you kind of peak, and then
Mm-hmm.
go to the other
Right.
side, and so you have to balance it out. But I want to shift also to talk about women. What do we have for men?
Mm-hmm.
What do we have for men, hormone wise?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Men are somewhat more simple, only because, testosterone is the main
My
driving
wife would totally agree
hormone
with you.
there. Biochemically, that's all I'm saying.
Biochemically, it's true. It's true, guys. We
I
are.
know. Yeah, and it's really interesting. You think of, low T is sort of the nomenclature that a lot of people use, but low testosterone, it's not being picked up on until much later in life when it's really occurring like in the 30s and the 40s, which is really a surprise to me when I started seeing this. I'm like, these are still young guys. Why are they having problems with low testosterone? Well, it's diet. So many people just aren't eating well. And by the way, the best hormone diet is more of your paleo-like diet, plant-based, not no processed food, sugars, that type of thing. So it's a logical, healthy diet. But if you are eating terribly, if you're not sleeping, I mean, all those things, it comes back to the same thing for everybody, diet and lifestyle. It just
Mhm.
eats up your hormones, and then you have problems. So if you start developing low testosterone, then you're going to have problems with your brain. You're not going to think as well. You're not going to be as focused or clear. You're going to have worse hand-eye coordination. I mean, of course, sexual dysfunction can occur, erectile dysfunction, but even beyond that, what's happening with your muscles, what's happening with your coordination, your immune system, your bones, your heart. Testosterone supports all these different things. So you can hopefully work on the baseline of diet and exercise. I mean, it's a broken record, I know, but it really is true. If all that is set, then you also look into potentially, what is your body doing with that testosterone? There are enzymes that promotes the creation of estrogen. So it's normal for men to have progesterone and estrogen, just not as high as women. So testosterone actually makes estrogen in men and women. It's just more abundant in men. So the enzyme is called aromatase, and if that enzyme is overactive for some reason, then your body is taking that testosterone and making a lot of estrogen. So you're not getting the benefit of testosterone, but you're getting a whole lot of estrogen, which may potentially then go down into that more destructive estrone, which is bad for the prostate. So hormone testing is just as important for men as it is for women to understand how your body is using the
Mhm.
hormones in a different way. Now, if we determine your testosterone is low, we'll deal with stress and diet and all of that. Is aromatase involved? There's no test to actually tell you that. You kind of have to just see, is too much of your testosterone going down into estrogen? If so, there are aromatase inhibitors that medically, but also in the natural world, there are some herbs that can help do that. So you can kind of try and block that from happening and go backstream and
Mhm.
build back up the testosterone. To directly build up the testosterone, you can use an herb called tribulus. Aside from that, in the natural world, you just work around what can you use to help develop your hormones better, like the vitamins and the minerals, to make your own testosterone and not let stress suck it out. So tribulus is the most direct approach.
Mhm.
Aside from that, there is testosterone replacement therapy, which would be the bioidentical hormone treatment using testosterone, again derived from soy, but concentrated into a prescription. Generally, that's as a cream. That's how I've used it. There are some people who will also use it as an injection or in a pellet form that just gets put under the skin. It's actually a surgical procedure. There are other medications that you can use as well, but I find the herbs, tribulus especially, works pretty effective in an uncomplicated case. So it's pretty interesting, and it's the same idea you go back to. Does it benefit you? So yeah, your labs might look low, but do you actually feel low testosterone? If not, you have to debate, well, is it worth treating? I don't want to just treat a lab. I want
Right.
you to feel better.
Mhm.
So it all comes back to the same approach, but specific for men. That's what we think about. How's your body using the testosterone? Do we need to bump it up in one way or another?
It's a remedy that a lot of older men are looking into, and now I think it just kind of got popularized, overhyped, and the medical industry is trying to probably pull back from that a little bit. And it is a complex. I like your approach because it's like it is a complex problem. So it's like, what is causing those issues, right? So you have to look at everything, and you always have to start with that baseline of proper nutrition and the stressors in your life. But it's good to know that there's something that can be done. In terms of like remedies and sources of good compounds, not everything that's on a shelf in a store is going to be identical in terms of bioavailability and whether purity and processing. How do you go
Right,
about
right.
determining some of that as well, right? Like, let's say this
Okay.
echinacea is not this echinacea, or like it's different, processed differently,
Right.
cold pressed, cold, processed, fermented, all these different, varieties of processing of the same types of compounds. How do you navigate in
Mm-hmm.
that space, and how do you choose the ones that you
Mm-hmm.
feel are effective?
The first thing I do is I look at the bottle's other ingredients. So, the label will have all the specific milligrams of this, that, and the other thing. At the very bottom, it says other ingredients, and that's basically what's in the capsule or what the capsule's made out of. It should
Mm-hmm.
only be what the capsule is made out of, which is either going to be a gelatin for a soft gel or some sort of cellulose from a plant fiber. That's about it. There might be a
Mm-hmm.
couple other fillers like magnesium stearate or silicone, but even those I'm kind of iffy with. I want it to be as pure as possible. So you don't really want anything written in there except for maybe one or two things. If it has more than that, if it starts getting into a dye number, something or other, definitely put it back on the shelf, or some chemical you can't pronounce. That's always bad, no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then choosing, if that's fine, if you're looking at the label and trying to choose, that's a little bit harder because you have to know what the active forms are. For instance, vitamin E. That one is a little bit easier now because the synthetic vitamin E is called DL, tocopherol. And we know years ago a study came out saying, oh, vitamin E is actually bad for the heart. Stop taking it. Well, they based it on the DL, the synthetic, and that was bad for the heart. But the natural mixed tocopherols or the non-DL vitamin E is okay. So you do kind of need to know those little tweaks. Or for instance, magnesium, calcium, super common minerals, but lots of different forms. If I
Mm-hmm.
see a vitamin that says calcium carbonate or magnesium oxide, those are the cheapest, least well absorbed mineral forms. So I'm going to put that back on the shelf too. Now, in my training, we learned about all the good supplement companies out there, and most of them were created from, a lot of them were created from naturopaths because they were graduating, decades ago, and they had to work with what was on the shelf, and it wasn't very good. So they created
Mm-hmm.
their own company. So a lot of what I use is considered more physician grade that you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to find on the shelf anyway. But then again, I'm trying to use it to help a particular problem for somebody, so it might be stronger in general. In
Right.
general,
What are some of your
but for
favorite brands?
yourself, ooh, for vitamins or herbs?
Both.
Okay. Pure Encapsulations is great. Perk, Gaia, Herb Farm, Thorn, lots of them. If you go to a small health food store, they're going to have the better things.
Okay.
I wouldn't suggest a big one, even
Mm.
a big grocery store one without naming names.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be average. They might not be terrible, but they're going to be average. So a
Mm-hmm.
small grocery store, a small health food store, co-op, they're probably going to have the better things. And it doesn't have to be a very fancy label. It doesn't have to be pretty. Shy away from those. That might be another little indicator.
Mm. And
But you do have
piggybacking
to be
off of
careful.
that,
You're right.
yeah, piggybacking off of that question that I had kind of queued up in my brain was about magnesium and absorption of magnesium. Is it true that we absorb magnesium better through skin than through our digestive system, or is that just, you know?
It depends. If you have GI problems, yeah, that could be better.
Mm,
And we have some people who need to inject it.
good
But if you
response.
don't have a GI, yeah.
Was not a trick question. I promise, honestly.
But it's great that it exists. You can take it by pill, you can do it in a cream or an
Mm-hmm.
oil, or inject it in your muscle, or you can do it in an IV in your vein.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever works better for you. I mean, most people do okay taking it orally, but for some people, a lot of people know it will irritate their stomach. Well, there are lots of different forms, though. Magnesium citrate is the one that people use to help with digestion, to have an easier bowel movement. But that's the one, if you take too much, then you have gas, bloat, and diarrhea, and you're in trouble. And people feel like, well, I just can't take magnesium. You can't take that form. Your body doesn't want it, or you're sensitive to it. So there's glycinate, there's malate, and there's a lot of different research on these different forms so you can know which one is good for you. Like magnesium threonate is good for the brain, magnesium malate is good for the muscles, citrate for the bowels. Magnesium glycine the glycine is kind of like the overall one that's not going to bother you if you don't need it for a particular thing. So you can make it complicated or you can keep it simple. But if you have a problem with a nutrient form, then you might want to do a little more research and see what else is out there. But magnesium is the most deficient mineral in our bodies, and it's because it's not in the soil anymore for the most part, and we use it for hundreds of different things every moment of the day. So you basically can't go wrong getting a little extra magnesium in your body as long as you choose the right form that doesn't irritate your stomach. Because
Hmm.
I don't want you to take magnesium just because you know it's good for you, but you're going to put up with diarrhea every day. Then
Right,
you're going to
right.
become nutrient depleted, and that's not a good
Well,
thing.
but at least you're going to know when you had too much
Right,
of
right.
magnesium.
Exactly. And then you just cut back and you're fine.
So what does Dr. Karen do for like her supplements and her daily, vitamins and herbs? And what do you typically go after and why?
Well, I do some little basic herbal combination for stress for every single day, and vitamin D and magnesium. And I take a couple things to help balance hormones, as well as glutathione and a probiotic for digestion. We didn't talk about that, but most people can't go too far wrong using a probiotic. The microbiome is another big topic we could get into, but we're starting to understand that it's not just a bunch of bacteria running around in our digestive system. It's really an environment, and that's what the microbiome is talking about. What else is going on in there? How are these bacteria related? Because we're actually outnumbered 10 bacteria to one human cell. So we are actually more bacteria than humans. So we have to do everything we can to feed those bacteria to keep them happy so that we're happy, because they do actually play a role with our mood and our immune system and our digestion, our absorption.
What supplements and what vitamins and what things that you take on a regular basis to supplement your healthy lifestyle?
Well, I take vitamin D, I take a probiotic, I take glutathione, something for stress every day, something to balance my hormones every day, magnesium. I think that's everything. Oh, a little something for immune support because it's winter right now. So I'm trying to cover all my bases and doing the logical things like we've been talking about, stress and the basic minerals and vitamins that almost everybody's deficient in, it seems. So, I've done some testing on myself as well, so I know some specific things that I need, and I am basically practicing what I preach.
Any specific brands that you are happy with in terms of like these supplements?
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there, really. I mean, there are a lot of charlatans as well, so you do need to be careful, but I tend to go with the physician grade supplements, but you can find some of these on the shelf as well, such as Thorne or Pure Encapsulations, Integrative Therapeutics, Perk, Gaia, Herb Farm. Um, oh, that's what's coming to mind, but there are tons of them out there, lots of good ones. But the key is looking at that other ingredient list. That really will tell you a whole lot. That'll guide you in a good direction.
So I want to thank you really much, a lot, all of it, and heartfelt thanks for spending all this time. And clearly there's more to be talked about, and this is just a fascinating set of topics, and I really enjoy listening to you and learning from you. You are a fountain of information, and I would like to invite you back and continue some of these topics and explore them again. And I would like to ask you for another interesting person that you would like to invite. And I know there's someone in your practice that you mentioned, and I would love to hear their perspective, and would like to arrange that. And who would that be, just for the audience to
His
hear
name's
about?
Absolutely. His name's Dr. Ali Safian. He's an internist, traditionally trained, but very early in his career, he realized traditional medicine was not for him. Basically, it was going to kill him by the age of 30. So he decided to find a different way. So practiced internal medicine, but then he went into medical acupuncture, prolotherapy, PRP, allergy elimination, a lot of different things. So he is the perfect balance of Eastern meets Western medicine and all the functional medicine in between. So he's a fountain of information. He's extraordinarily entertaining. He's very, very fun and charismatic, and I think you'll have a ball listening to him.
I'm looking forward to that. So let's arrange that. And
Yeah.
until next time, we're going to reach out to you and set up another episode. I'm looking super forward to that. And thank you for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Until then.